Welcome to YINZ Podcast. I'm your host, Envy. Yeah, one thing I want to add is the Down Syndrome Association also gives scholarships
Mm.
and every year to attend the Down Syndrome annual event. Is that still taking place?
We actually a few years ago, 2019, the National Down Syndrome Congress was in Pittsburgh, and so that's one of the times when we really developed those scholarships to be able to do that. But there still is support for families who are trying to go to the National Congress, because if you imagine, it can be an expensive process. So I would just connect with the Down Syndrome Association of Pittsburgh if you're interested in learning more.
So, since we talked about all these resources, and one more other thing probably parents would like to know is what kind of educational framework you recommend for the Down syndrome population and our community, and what is the difference? Because, why some schools only recommend special ed classrooms?
Yeah, so when we think about education, and thinking about the best method to educate an individual, I think we have to think and take a step back and recognize that there isn't a one size fits all. I think that there are a couple principles that are really, really important. So I absolutely believe in inclusion. And inclusion means that we don't just include somebody in a classroom, but we also give them the things that they need to thrive in that classroom. So all the research around inclusion, meaning that a classroom shouldn't be separated by abilities, that there shouldn't be a classroom for exceptional children, there shouldn't be a classroom for children who have normal cognitive abilities, and there shouldn't be a classroom for those who have intellectual differences or neurodivergence. That actually, the research that shows that when we put them all in the same classroom, everybody benefits, is true, but there's a really, really important point in that is that each of those children in that classroom have the support that they need. So, for instance, if you have an inclusive classroom with an individual who has an intellectual difference, they may need an aid or a support to be with them, so that as we're doing a lesson, they have someone who's walking alongside them and support them. When they get that appropriate support, when there's equity, when they get what they need, actually it benefits the child next to them who maybe doesn't need that support, but that aid can turn next to that child who maybe is struggling for a few seconds and help them as well. So we know inclusive classrooms work best when everybody in that classroom gets what they need. So I think that we have to be really careful when we think about inclusion. We don't just mean include, we mean inclusion, where we get what, not only are people present, but they have what they need to thrive and flourish, and that helps everybody in the classroom thrive and flourish. I said it's not a one size fits all because the reality is dependent on the school and the school district that you're in. There may be a difference in resources. And so if you are just putting a child in a classroom so that you can say you have inclusive classrooms, but that child does not receive the things they need, that actually can be detrimental to that child. So I think that you can't have inclusion without equity. And so we have to make sure that all the children are getting what they need. So when I meet with families around IEP meetings, because we have these discussions all the time, it's not a simple discussion. It's a discussion of saying, as your school is assessing what your child needs, are they able to provide what your child needs, and what environment can they do that in? And that helps us know what is best for your specific child.
Yeah, that's sums up the parents need to work with the school to have a program, both inclusion and what child needs. So it's a combination of general ed, a combination of special ed, kind of pulling out and teaching few of those things like physical therapy they probably can pull out and do, and sometimes with aid they can do few things in the classroom.
Yeah, what we call pushing in. So pushing in, how do we help an individual stay within the general ed classroom with the appropriate supports that they need in that classroom?
Okay, how can they address these issues, both the kids and the parents stress, when I say how to cope their stress and all this stuff.
When we think about some of the behavioral challenges that arise for our specific community, I think it's really important to recognize some of the strengths and challenges that lead to those. So what I mean by that is we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to how we address behavior because there are some unique perspectives that our folks have. I often think that a lot of behaviors arise when there is this imbalance between social strength, the ability to read the room and wanting to socially connect, and communication, where I may not be able to express everything that I'm thinking inside of my head in a way that allows me to let you know how I feel and what I want. And so when a behavior happens, behaviors that are common, stop and flop. I'm frustrated, so I go down on the floor and I have a tantrum and I say, I'm not moving. Or physical communication, I hit somebody. What we have to see is that those behaviors are communicating something. That individual is trying to communicate something they need. And so correction of that behavior isn't about saying, stop doing that behavior. It's understanding what the antecedent event is. What was that individual trying to communicate? And then I often will have these discussions and say, how we address this is a couple ways. Number one, the best way to correct it is to prevent. And so if we can understand that a behavior is starting to happen over and over again, we have to recognize what is that child trying to communicate, and is there a way to address that need before we see the behavior. The second piece, though, is that sometimes behaviors are happening, and how do you address the behavior in the moment? And one of the things that is really, really powerful is that our kids are often reinforced socially, meaning that any kind of feedback you give, either positive and negative, can reinforce a behavior. And so if a child stops and flops, and you're down on the floor and you're saying, we got to stop doing this. You need to get up. We need to go do this thing. And as you're starting to show emotion, that is reinforcing the behavior because that child is drawing you in and trying to get you to connect with them. So often what can happen is that in that moment, the best way is if that child is safe is to actually walk away and give them a chance to cool down. And when you walk away, they will recognize this is not being socially and reinforced. And sometimes that diminishes that behavior. Now, I said this and it sounds really, really simple, but that is not the case. These are really, really challenging situations. And so I don't want to overly simplify it, but I want to say those are some general concepts. And I would say this simple discussion is not enough to support families in being able to address behavior. It's just starting to talk a little bit about some of the construct behind it. I want to give you two really important resources. Number one, there's a great book by David Stein called Supporting Positive Behavior in Children and Teens with Down Syndrome. And it really talks about the cognitive biology behind why behaviors can occur in individuals with Down syndrome that is different than we think about in other groups of people to better understand how we support those individuals walking through those behaviors. The second thing I will also highlight is that as part of our center, if you live in Western PA, the Down Syndrome Center, we actually have a behavioral therapist who's part of our group, Dr. Santa Maria, who only takes care of individuals with Down syndrome and specifically supports families navigate situations like this. And so she is a great resource that if you're needing support, reach out to us and we can make that connection. Because I think that when we have a challenging behavior, once again, it's not a quick discussion that helps get you to the way in which you can solve and work together. It's usually a process and you need to work with somebody to help navigate that process. And so just to recognize, take-home points would be that behaviors are often, I would say, about communication, not about defiance. And so what is the child trying to communicate and how do we address that thing they're trying to communicate? And that we have great resources to support you because we know this is a really challenging piece and we want to make sure you're best supported as possible.
All resources and contact information you can find in our description of this video.